And welcome on in, everybody, to the Check Your Brain podcast. Wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, it is available on the Rumble page, on YouTube, but it's also wherever you get your podcasts on the podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio and everything like that. So go check it out. And if you want more episodes like this, along with early access to guests or my solo episodes or anything like that, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur for $3 a month. You get a lot of podcasts per month. That's a lot of value. If you like what I have to say, anything going on in my life, or the guests that I book. If not, then well, I hope you enjoy this free episode. Yes, again, that's the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. My guest this week, we're gonna have a lot of fun talking to some Stooges today, and he is an author. He's based out of Canada, but I'm glad to bring him here to the States, and his name is Geoff Dale. Geoff, thanks for doing the podcast.
I love being here. It's great. Anything about Shemp and the Stooges is great for me.
Well, talking about Shemp, you have a book that it seems like it's been a labor of love for you for a long time. You've been doing a lot of research on it, which I want to hear more about. But it's called Much More Than a Stooge, Shemp Howard by Geoff Dale. It's available there. You can go to barnesandnoble.com and then basically all the other places to go purchase it. But go get it, hardcover, paperback, whatever it is. Just go buy this if you are a Stooge maniac. And I've noticed this over time when it comes to the Stooges. The true purists of the Three Stooges are not necessarily the classic lineup of Larry, Curly, and Moe. You will talk to Stooge enthusiasts, and they'll say, I don't know, there's some Shemp ones that are pretty good too. And I mean, I don't know how many Joe Besser ones, but some will say like a Curly Joe could have added a little bit. But I think if you're a true Stooge fan, you can appreciate what Shemp was able to bring to the troupe.
Absolutely. The issue with Shemp is that he was one of the originals. And there's a huge argument over this. Who was the first Stooge? I think the issue is who was the original Stooge? And that's what my book sort of in a sense is about. His wife kind of pinned it down perfectly. Basically, Ted Healy, who was a superstar of the day, was, looking for Stooges. One of them, of course, he happened upon very obviously, was his childhood friend, Moe. And so that was a natural. But Shemp was right along there too, around the same time. So we're talking 1923. That's exactly 1 century ago. And the issue is, if you look carefully, if you do the research, or even if you just glance over the history, you'll notice there's a lot of Stooges that were with Healy. But most of them either disappeared at some point, or even Moe, in fact, he went back to selling real estate like his mom did for quite some time. But the most constant of all that time, between 1923 and about 1930, was in fact Shemp. So his wife says, she said, he was the original Stooge. And I said, believe me, I was there, I know. So I'm going with Gertrude, or Babe, however you want to call her. And I think that's essentially Shemp is the original Stooge.
So talk about Ted Healy, for example, because I think, again, if you're a big Stooge fan, you know who Ted Healy is. But it was Ted Healy and his Stooges. It was this group of, he's the ringleader, he's the straight man, and you get these crazy guys that are behind him. Talk a little bit about him, because he had a very complicated life and a very, have they even solved that murder of him?
See, that's just the issue of it being murder, I think, was pretty much ruled out. I tell you what, and I don't want to plug another person's book, but he's a great guy. Bill Cassara, he's written a book on Ted Healy. As far as I know, it's the only book. And Ted Healy is a fascinating character. I refer to him as much as I can in the book. What you're talking is a very tall gentleman, probably around 6 foot. Shemp, if you want to call him the tallest Stooge, that means he was either 5'6" or 5'7". So, reasonable, I suppose. Curly was around that height too. But the issue was that Healy was looking for Stooges. At first, there was no name. In fact, the first billing of the two, which was Shemp and Moe, actually Shemp and Harry, because Harry's his first name. It's Harry Moses Howard. The first billing was something to the effect of, and I don't have it in front of me, I should, to something like two odd-looking clods or something like that. That was in the billing, something of that nature. But within a short period of time, Ted and his wife, who was the other headliner, Betty, basically he gave them some billing, and it was Shemp and Mo. So that was essentially the startup. Over the years, the names sort of, I mean, you know, at some point they were his Stooges. They were also the Southern Gentleman was another one. There were several names they went under, and at one point when they finally went out on their own, it was Howard, Fine, and Howard. So number of different names. Healy was Healy gets downplayed a lot, and that's really sad because the reality was if the word superstar had been used in the day, then in fact Ted Healy would have been a superstar, and he was. He was everything. He was a straight man. He was the leader. He was the guy who slapped and hit the other Stooges, just like Mo eventually ended up doing. He was a nightclub performer. He wrote music lyrics. I mean, he did it all. He was everything. And from what you may have heard, a lot of that is untrue. Whether or not he had his own personal problems, they may have, you know, sort of seeped over a little privately behind the scenes. However, anytime you ever heard any comments from any of them, and that would be Mo, Larry, Shemp, obviously, and Curly. And in fact, Shemp basically said at one point, Ted Healy is the funniest person I've ever met. And it shows. And he also taught Shemp one really, really important issue. How do you sort of position yourself either on stage or on film in a nightclub when you're relatively short? And this guy is about, you know, close to 6 foot tall or maybe more. So Shemp learned really well because, I mean, he ended up being in movies with, well, Jimmy Stewart, his first film, you know what it was? It was a Shemp short called Fine Art. I mean,
so it was Jimmy Stewart's first thing was in a Shemp, not the other way around.
Oh no, he was paid $50, which, by the way, $50 back then for an unknown. Whoa, that's huge bucks. But the bottom line is that people said, oh my God, this guy's what, 6'2", lean-looking guy, really handsome. We got things going on for him. So he sort of appeared. And there's one scene, if you ever want to see that film, and I hope I got the name right. It's a little short. It's back in the 30s. And there's a scene where Shemp, if you can imagine, is in a little fisticuffs with Jimmy Stewart. And it looks like he's winning. And that's the killer. He knew how to position himself. He could own the space he was in. Very, very, very clever. Did it in the movies. Another person, John Wayne, who was, by the way, a neighbor, not a close neighbor, but in the neighborhood. And he was in some scenes in the beginning of the movie Pittsburgh, which a very enjoyable movie. Pittsburgh, starring John Wayne and let me see, Marlene Dietrich and Randolph Scott. Huge name.
Randolph Scott.
Yes. And if you want this, they bill Shemp, and I've got this in my book. It's the billing. Da-da-da-da-da-da, Randolph Scott, Marlene Dietrich, and featuring the ugliest man in Hollywood, Shemp Howard. So Ted Healy was a major factor in his life, certainly in a professional way. And anyone who downplays it, and anyone who says that, you know, he was this brute and this cat. I mean, he had, like a lot of people back then, you know, the entertainers of the world, they drank a little. Nowadays, it's more like they smoke a little or do something else. But back then, they drank a lot and it got them in some trouble. But they had a good act. They were very good. And Shemp owes a lot to Ted Healy. And it shows. Very, very, very quick on the pickup. That's Shemp.
So eventually they have their split with Ted Healy. Mo kind of takes on the Ted Healy role in the trio, but yes. Shemp wants to, like you said, he goes out on his own, and they bring Jerome, bring Jerry as a part of the act, now Curly. Yes. And so for, gosh, it was probably about 17 years that Shemp was on his own while the Three Stooges were were huge at that time. I believe the first billing of Larry, Curly, and Moe was at the RKO Theater just up the road from me here in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the early 30s. And I talk a little bit about the Shemp in those days where, like, I know you were talking about the early days and what he credits to Ted Healy, but the fact that, like you said, he wasn't the most handsome man, so he's not going to be the Humphrey Bogart, he's not going to be Cary Grant, but he's enough where he's kind of a character that he's marketable in that way. Plus, he has great comedic timing.
Right. It's interesting because when he first started, and by the way, when they split, the Stooges were still doing well. They were basically with Ted Healy for a while before they actually became and were known as the Three Stooges. But Shemp, basically, his wife said to him, and there was, and you're going to get all these rumors there that he said he's a brute, he's a beast, you got to get away from Ted Healy. What she in fact really did say, and this is pretty much in the history books, really, she said, look, my dear, you're talented enough. You can go out on your own. Give it a try. And basically, she was a woman ahead of her time. And he said, yes, I'll do it. So he ended up with Vitaphone. And I don't know exactly how many films he did. And by the way, when I said he did 105 films as a solo artist, that should be 105 known films, because there have got to be people out there, including one of my editors, great guy, Brent Seguin, just absolutely knows everything about it. I wouldn't doubt if he's out there looking through just heaps and heaps of films, wondering, is Shemp in this one? Is it? Sometimes someone's going to come up with the 106th film. But basically, he went through this. He went through comedies. He appeared with Burt Lahr in one that was before The Wizard of Oz. He appeared with Georgie Jessel. And by the way, Georgie Jessel, Toastmaster of America, Toastmaster General, I think that's proper. And it's short with him, and Shemp talks him. It's beautiful. You know, basically Georgie's standing there doing his thing. It was, you know, what he's supposed to do. But Shemp is just going on and on and on. He's an agent trying to sell Jessel on using an attractive young woman, you know, for this performance they're doing. And you don't know at that point how much of it is ad lib, because that's another thing too. The ad libbers of today, you know, which great, I love them all, Robin Williams, the whole bit. But that's what Shemp was known for. He was a great ad libber. I mean, you know, some directors, most notably Jules White of the Stooges, I mean, didn't like that particularly, you know, wasn't keen. He liked to stick strictly to the script. But Shemp was, you know, he went off. So anyway, Vitaphone, a couple of other names, Monogram, like that. Universal, amazing. He appeared in 5 Abbott and Costello films. He appeared, like I said, with John Wayne. I appeared with Sabu in an Oscar-nominated film called Arabian Nights. It's remarkable how many really top-notch names of the day that Shemp was with, and he held his own. So, and it was with Columbia too, with his own series. So, a lot of films. Wonderful, wonderful.
So he's solo and everything. He has a great career, anyways. But then Curly has his issues. Of course, before the Strokes, he was a womanizer. He was a drunk in a lot of ways. He'd be performing at like midnight at the Trocadero and everything. And you know, there was some issues going into it with Curly, especially with his weight. And then eventually, when the debilitating stroke hit him, where he just couldn't perform, Shemp ends up becoming a part of the act. But did he feel it was going to be a temporary thing, that he's already made it on his own, he's just trying to help his brothers out? Was he reluctant about it, or was he excited to be a part of the act again? Obviously, albeit it's unfortunate that they see their brother going through these health issues. But how did Shemp feel with returning to the act? Was he all about it?
Not entirely. The bottom line is, he really wanted to stay where he was, and that was as a solo. He was doing pretty well with Columbia. I don't know whether he was going to go back to Universal or anything, but he certainly did very well there. So the contract, in fact, it was written into the contract, which isn't in my book actually per se, because it's hard to get, that this will be temporary until Curly recovered. And whatever people outside, like me, people on the outside, whatever they think about, well, they probably knew that Curly was never going to recover. That's neither here nor there, because I don't believe anyone but the family knew that. And quite frankly, I don't think Shemp would have signed had he thought that Curly wasn't going to get better, especially because he was the youngest. Curly had a very rough time in a lot of respects, because have you ever seen a picture of Curly in his younger years?
Mm-hmm.
He had, like, this great schlock of
Full head of hair.
Full head of hair, auburn hair, big handlebar mustache, or I don't know if it was handlebar mustache, but it was really, he loved the ladies, and he was also a first-class dancer. By the way, his dancing buddy back in the old days at nightclubs was none other than who was it? George Raft. George Raft.
Oh, really? Wow.
George Raft and Curly Howard. So not dance partners, but they used to be basically there every other day or whenever they could make it, and they'd be taking the ladies around, dancing with them. And it was a great scene. I mean, I'd love to see something like that in a film. I'd like to see a completely different film. But
by the way, you mentioned about Curly being a dancer. Didn't he have a situation where he shot himself in the foot accidentally, and he had always had a limp the rest of his life?
Yeah, he didn't want to go in for surgery to remove the bullet, because I guess he maybe wasn't too keen on surgery at that point. I believe he might have been around 12 years old. I'm sure there's a Stooge fanatic or expert that would correct me on that. And he went with that. However, even with that noticeable sort of limp, or whatever you want to call it, stride that he was a very good dancer. And if you watch him, you watch his movements, he's pretty good for a chubby guy. But you got to feel really sorry, because I mean, it was his idea. He shaved his head, and then they called him Curly, etc., etc. But there must have been an awful lot making sort of within his personality, his inner self, that's saying, I used to love to go out and party and have a great time and that. So I think probably the drinking would have become excessive to hide a lot of these inner feelings, and of course it didn't help his health at all. I mean, so Halfwit's Holiday, he has that major stroke right in the middle of the just after they break, and he's basically sitting there on a chair crying and barely being able to speak. And it's really sad, because I mean, I don't know your feelings about it. People talk about the Shemp camp and the Curly camp. To me, that's nonsense. I mean, I like Shemp. I really do. I mean, I gravitated towards him and Larry, actually. Those two at first. So I like them both. I just felt very, very sorry for Curly and what happened in that. And Shemp, by the way, as like the other Stooges, I mean, Larry basically was the one who suggested they give a portion of their earnings for Curly's upkeep, and that sort of struck Mo. I just thought, wow, Larry's really more than a friend. And
I love this photo that I have here for folks only listening right now. This is now I forgot what was the name of this short, where it's a Shemp, but they have Curly there with the full head of hair there. This is post stroke, but they wanted to have that where they're all in this.
And here I am. I think it's Hold That Lion, but I'm not sure. Again, I could be corrected there. I think it is. But basically what he does, he's the passenger who snores, and they're making fun of this incredibly weird snoring noise that he's making. And it's a great picture, though. It is really, really, and it must have been kind of heartening in a way for all of them. I believe it was Julius White, the director, who made the suggestion, well, why not have him make a cameo appearance? He was going to make another one too, the one with the chefs, the Malice in the Palace, I believe that was, and that was cut out of the film for whatever reason. Sad to say, but it's the Hold That Line. That is, as you said before, some good, very good Shemp shorts. Despite the fact the budgets were cut, there was a lot less location shooting, and a number of things were downgrading the whole sort of notion of short films. However, he did some great ones, and I think that's one of them. In fact, I think the first one he did, which is Fright Night, one of the reasons it was so good, even though it was written with Curly in mind, is that Shemp was a lifelong boxing fan. He absolutely loved it. He did the Ali Shuffle before Ali, or he did the pre-Ali Shuffle.
Yeah,
And,
that thing he used to do with his legs, where like he
oh
would
yeah,
have his one leg swing over the other leg as he's
yeah,
stepping over that leg. It's incredible to watch this. I mean, you want to
yeah,
talk about this family of dancers, how talented they were. Where Curly can do the the Watusi and everything like that, and then you're seeing what he would do this in these boxing sketches. He loved, which I want to get to boxing because we'll talk a little more about with the end of Shemp towards the end. But I want to ask you, because you mentioned Malice in the Palace, that maybe about a month or so ago, I came across a movie that I had heard of, and I found it online somewhere, and it's called Stooge Mania. Do you know about
uh-huh.
this movie?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
So Stooge Mania came out in the mid 80s among this resurgence of Three Stooges popularity, about 10 years after Larry and Moe ended up passing away. And
Right.
you had the Curly Shuffle that came out in about 83. So this Stooge Mania was like 85, 86. Actually, I can pull it up right now. I have it. It's full disclosure, not a very good movie. And
No.
it stars Josh Mostel, the son of Zero Mostel, as
Right.
a guy who's I think he's engaged to Melanie Chartoff, and there it is. Sid Caesar makes a weird cameo in this too, but it's
Yes.
this it's this disease that people are having where the Three Stooges keep showing up, and like it's not so much that you're a fan, now you're such a super fan that you turn on the TV and the Stooges are on. Okay, yeah, makes sense. But then he's opening doors and he's seeing arcade games and the Three Stooges keep popping up. But the weird part about this Stooge Mania movie is they didn't have actual access to these from Columbia Pictures. So how were they able to get away with it? Well, apparently 4 Three Stooges films slipped into public domain, and only one of them were a Curly, which is a Disorder in the Court. The rest of them were 3 Shemps, and a lot of people are like, how did the Shemp ones? Why are there so many Shemp ones in this dumb movie here? And they've slipped into public domain. How did that end up happening? Like, how did they end up losing the rights to these movies?
Well, that's a good question, and I really didn't do much research on that, so I'm not sure.
I apologize. I ambushed you with that terrible movie,
No,
but I
actually,
just
no.
had to ask you about that.
It is interesting because one of my jobs in my 51 years as a writer, that shows you how old I am. I was a film critic for quite some time, actually a paid film critic, and I would see everything under the sun. And I remember seeing that, and I remember so little about the movie after I saw it. I never saw it again. I just thought, well, the fact that Sid Caesar was in it, oh my goodness, this is awful. By the way, Sid Caesar, on one occasion, with another actor, both met up with Jill Howard, the granddaughter, the elder granddaughter. She's not old, but the eldest of the 2 granddaughters. And basically, her and the daughter-in-law Jerry were talking about Shemp, passing away and that. And Sid Caesar was like actually, sort of him, and I believe Milton Berle at one point too. Just tears on their eyes. They loved Shemp. By the way, Frank Sinatra, by the way, was a huge Stooge fan. And Shemp, Larry, and Moe appeared on a 1951 episode of the Frank Sinatra Hour. And it's quite
Oh, I
funny.
didn't know that. I got to look this up.
Look at it, just check it out. Check it out, Frank Sinatra and the Three Stooges, 1951. It's really interesting. I'll tell you why it's interesting, particularly because Shemp gets down on the ground and does the spinorama, the curly rotation, which I thought, whoa, this is interesting. I don't know if anyone else thought much of it, but it was really enjoyable, and it's pretty obvious that Sinatra loved slapstick. I mean, you get lots of stories about Sinatra, but I happen to like the guy. But anyway, he was a fan of the Stooges, and it's quite funny. And Vernon Dent, I believe, also was in that particular show with Sinatra's. So knew a lot of people.
So, because you're a huge Stooge fan and being a Shemp fan, and just to prove that I'm a Shemp fan, I have a picture with my good pal Perry Caravello here, and I'm wearing a Drew Friedman Shemp t-shirt here. He's still trying to get this Vermeer of the Borscht Belt documentary off the ground, but I decided to donate some money, and I ended up getting a t-shirt here with his absolutely perfect drawing of Shemp with the dots.
Oh,
Um,
he's in my book, by the way, Drew Freeman. He's astonishing. I mean,
Drew
one of the
has
great.
his museum, and
Oh,
he loves looking at the Stooges, especially Shemp. Is like he said, Shemp is one of those characters you love as an artist. You want to draw because
yeah,
he's the facial features. Him and Tor Johnson are, I think, are two of his favorites
yeah,
to do. But so Shemp is with the act, and this temporary thing ends up
right.
lasting almost a decade. And then of course they lost Curly in the early 50s, but then
Mhm.
Shemp has an unfortunate passing. This was, I believe, he was, from what I
Yes,
remember, he was leaving a boxing match and he had a heart
yeah.
attack. Is that what happened?
Okay, not quite. Oh, yes, most of that's correct. He was coming back from the a night at the fights, which is regular for him. And by the way, he was often the main attraction. He used to be in the front row. He'd get up, he'd start dancing around, flinging his feet around, and the cornermen, when it was back to the action, they jump off the ropes and start waving the towel on Shemp, patting him down like he was an attraction. Shemp, Saturday or whatever it was, Friday night at the fights or whatever, with the boxers and Shemp. And bottom line is they were coming back on the way from the fights in a taxi, and he lit up a cigar, big cigar smoker, and he started to tell a joke, and bang, he fell flat into the lap of one of his two friends. And he didn't die actually on the spot there. As far as I understand, he was in fact declared passed away at the hospital, and it was of a cerebral hemorrhage,
Oh,
close to a heart attack. But that's the official word. That's the word from the family too. And nowadays, especially 60. I mean, I'm well past that, many years past that. And that seems to me it's a young, that's incredibly young. And for building personal information, my mother and I landed in New York from England. I was born in London, England, 1955, and I believe Shemp died about 3 days later. That's in my book.
really?
Nothing to do with anything. But if you want a link, and I mean, if there's a subconscious link there somewhere in our being, that was it. Because when everyone else, or not everybody, but a lot of people, when the Stooge films became available on 1958 on television, everyone was like, it was it. It was Curly, Larry, Moe. And every so often when a Shemp film would come on, there was some outright grumbling amongst people, quite a bit, and some sort of blase. Me, my first reaction, I was pretty young back then, I thought, well, he looks like the other Stooge kind of Moe, kind of different. His hair's kind of floppy, and I kind of like that. And I couldn't get enough of him. It was him and Larry that always sort of appealed to me. Larry, the former boxer, and Shemp, the huge boxing fan. So there you go. You
Yeah,
knew Shemp,
it's
you
well,
knew Larry was a
you know, it's
boxer.
funny you say that because of Shemp dying. You said Shemp died what, 3 days before or after you were born?
I think it was 3 days after. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to check that out. I should be a little more conscious of my facts, but we arrived on November 22nd. Absolutely, well, two people who, my poor mother and I was absolutely dreaded anything like water travel was, oh my God. Number of times I ended up throwing up over my mother on a bunk bed. So switched eventually. Um, and of course, back then, the old rub was from parents, you're not watching those Stooges, they're awfully violent. And I'm thinking to myself, 50 years later or whatever, a little more, the stuff that goes on now, people being decapitated, just bludgeoned to death constantly on regular television. I watch all the time. Now, you think about the Stooges, it's cartoon humor.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I mean, how funny is it having a saw, ground across your head, and it turns out that the saw is damaged and Curly's head is perfectly fine. It's
Yeah,
so silly.
I remember as a kid, my mom telling me, you know, if you hit your brother in the head with a hammer, it's not like the Three Stooges.
Yes,
So we had to make sure you're not Bugs Bunny and you're not the Three Stooges, so you
right.
can't hit your brother with a hammer. I will say, I was born. This is my Stooge connection. Joe Besser died the day before I was born.
Wow. Okay. I'm friends with I guess he's his nephew, one of his nephews on online, Jim Besser.
Okay.
And he didn't know him very well, which is he's another one, by the way, that I didn't think he's a perfect fit as the Stooge, but despite that, he fit in a way because he actually completed the sort of the momentum up to 100 years or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there was basically a line of 6 individuals, from the early days right till the end with the movies, which is Curly Joe Dorita as the last. So I think they all had their role. They had their part. And so people who trash Joe Besser and Curly Joe Dorita, number one, you ought to take a look at some of their short work, and also look at Joe Besser as Stinky on Abbott and Costello.
Oh,
You know,
he was great. He played that
yes,
effeminate character that
yeah,
a lot of people looked at. I think they looked at the Newman character on Seinfeld. They wanted to model after Joe Besser. And there's a
yeah,
lot of Abbott and Costello. If you watch Seinfeld and you watch Abbott and Costello, you go like, "Oh God, they just basically ripped off all the everything from
yeah.
this." So Shemp ends up passing away. They go on this search. They have to fulfill their contract.
Mhm.
And like you mentioned, Joe Besser joins the act, and he's only there, and he leaves, I think, in 1959 because his wife wasn't doing well,
Yes.
and then they bring in Curly Joe Dorita. But talk about how this was fascinating to read. That I doing my research over time is that because there was no internet, there wasn't the type of Hollywood Reporter trades that you were seeing, that
Right.
Columbia Pictures kind of screwed over the Stooges for a long time, underpaid them, did not tell them anything about how popular they were. And Mo had a very inferior, like a real inferiority complex. Like he was really, um, I guess, very nervous about the act, and Columbia wasn't giving him the full story about how popular they were until their deal ends up running out. Then they're on television all the time, and they realize that they were massively popular in the country. Talk a little bit about those years that leading in towards the end of the 50s and how they just exploded in the 60s.
Well, it's kind of funny because some of what you said rings true. However, there is another issue at hand. Columbia really didn't hide that much from them, especially Mo, because Mo had taken the reins over, basically of the Stooges. Certainly, he may not have known everything. I mean, Jules White was, very much in command in terms of his role as a director and producer. They actually, as far as being underpaid, if you take a look, well, number one, go back and take, say, $500 then whatever year, then do a ratio change, say how much is that worth in 2023. You'd be surprised how well they were doing, because most of these acts, not like the main acts of the day, like say Clark Gable or Robert Mitchum or whoever, they weren't getting those kinds of bucks, but they were doing actually quite well. And it's quite surprising to see. Like I said, when Jimmy Stewart got $50 back in 1934 or thereabouts for that role, that was a lot of money. It's astounding how much money that was, and they did quite well. Larry, unfortunately, was a huge gambler, and he loved to party, and so Mo really helped him out a lot of times. Shemp was far more of a family guy. By the way, you probably read about his parties. They were the thing. You go to his
Mm-hmm.
parties. I mean, John Wayne showed up a couple of times. Jimmy Stewart, Martha Ray, she was huge. Martha Ray was massive at his parties. She just go around and almost do her shtick. And they, of course, met on the Hell's a Poppin' film back in the 40s. So I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall there. But Joe Besser, as you correctly said, he packed it in because his wife was quite ill, and then he just, I don't know if he did anything much more at that point. Curly Joe DeRita, from what I understand, and I did try to verify that, and I actually didn't mention it in the book. From my understanding is that it was Larry who saw him in a performance in Vegas and said, "You got to check out this Joe DeRita," because they knew he was doing shorts around their time too. He's good. He might be someone we might want to have as the Stooge. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And I don't know about people my age. I would have been 8, 9, 10 or thereabouts. I saw all 5 or 6 of their feature films, and they were now basically an act for kids because they weren't for kids originally. It just happened to be that way in the end. But I mean, they weren't great films, but I was glad I saw them because basically until the end, when, like you said, Larry died in about 72 from strokes again, and Mo was showing up at all kinds of student
Mike
functions.
Douglas.
Yeah, Mike Douglas. Mike Douglas, by the way, is another one. There's an underrated Shemp of the talk show host, Mike Douglas. He has John Lennon and Yoko Ono on for a whole week. He had Sly and the Family Stone. He had some of the biggest rock acts. He had Gene Simmons on one night with Toady Fields. That was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. So he had Mo on, and Mo managed to give the pie in the face to his wife. So Mo did that, and Mo, of course, was a heavy smoker, and finally found out that the end was near, and that was it. Because Emil Sitka was.
I was going to say Emil Sitka.
Another incredibly. He's another one of these guys, by the way. It could do a comedy really well. Could do drama too. Would have been perfect fit. And that's one thing. If I could make sure I get one thing in, there's a film. You heard of Convention Girl?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, it's a film that came out after the code came out, the Hays Code, which basically tightened up all the looseness and vulgarity and violence on these kind of films. Well, Convention Girl came out, and essentially it was about call girls of the night in Atlantic City, ladies of the evening, and it's not really a very good film. However, Shemp did something that a lot of other actors back then, especially comedic actors, did. He played a completely straight role. He was a con man. He was a nasty. What was his name? Dan Higgins, nasty little con. Dressed nicely, smoking a cigarette all the time. Carried a gun. Had a partner. I'm not going to give you too much of this because you can go right to Google and see it. And he, in fact, tries to kill his partner, shoots him. So we'll say an attempted murderer. Check that out. Basically, the movie this is my view as a film critic, the movie stinks until Shemp shows up. And he's got enough of a role that you're saying to yourself, oh, he's got a decent part here. I'm going to watch the whole thing. I don't think, I have the film now, of course, but then I now have a very large Shemp collection. So he could play straight, and he did on occasion. So he was versatile. No one can deny that.
Was that post Hays Code?
Yes, it was.
Okay,
and
so
what I'm saying was that the code had been in effect for those years, those fewer, not after the code was gone, but it was strictly. There was very little. How can I put it? Some of the movies prior to that would say Cagney and that. They were pretty juicy stuff. Cagney and Robinson, Edward G. Robinson and Humphrey Bogart, people like that, they were pretty violent for the day, but they were well-made films. They were fun. Audiences loved them. I don't know how you and I would have felt back then. I would have been enraged at this small c conservative outlook on film. Let us watch what we want to watch. Put a restriction on it. Whatever. So, but Shemp, if he could have been a dramatic actor, he would be there, and people would have accepted him. Very, very talented, diversified, ad-libber, great physical comedian. And the only problem really was that he had to follow basically a force of nature. And you got to love Curly for that. No disrespect for him whatsoever. Wonderful person in terms of skills.
Well, in your research, did Shemp ever have any animosity, or was he always happy for his brothers?
No, there was no animosity. They get along astonishingly well. And in fact, they also, you think that being slapped around silly like Larry was, because Larry took an awful lot of
He
punishment.
scabbed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
and he
lot
had
of
like
calluses.
but they were good. They were very good friends. And when Larry made that offer of a certain portion of their money going to Curly, I mean, that apparently, and I'm only quoting what I've read, that sort of just took Mo aback. He was so, thankful and delighted at that offer. He really couldn't grip it that well in the moment. Uh, and Shemp too. I mean, he used to visit all the time because they were very close neighbors. It must have been really rough. And I suspect, and I don't know though, because I'm sort of a soothsayer or anything. I suspect as Curly got worse and worse towards 1951, 52 when he died, that Shemp and the rest figured, oh, this is not happening. He's probably not coming back. So no animosity. He was there for another 3 years till 1955. And I would have loved to have seen him finish his years as a solo performer. I would have liked to have seen him like Harpo Marx appearing in a cameo on I Love Lucy.
Oh yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah. Like I could definitely see that.
could you see him on a game show? He could have done that beautifully. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying the game shows back then were as sort of wacky as some of them now. If something like Match Game had come along in the 50s, oh, I could see Shemp Howard on that. He could have taken Charles Nelson Riley's part.
Yeah, or like your show of shows and a lot of those the early 60s, the Camel Caravan,
Yeah,
being in
that's
Bob Hope stuff. Like I mean, I could have definitely seen him well into the 60s and having a huge like surge in popularity, but unfortunately he
yes.
passed away. Like you mentioned Robin Williams earlier. It seemed like he really was the Robin Williams, where Robin can go off script and ad lib and be crazy, but Robin could act serious. Obviously, he won an Oscar for it.
Yeah,
And it seems like Shemp did the same thing.
yeah. And you never know about awards and that. Myself personally, I'm not big on awards. I just tend to look at the performer. Like here's my attitude. Robert Mitchum and Barbara Stan were both great stars of the film noir. No Oscars. So that says something to me. Yeah, but it's either something or nothing. I think all the Stooges, especially the original four. I mean, you got Shemp, Mo, Larry, Curly. I mean, perfect match. They could have been the Four Stooges for all I know. You know, would have been
I just keep thinking about that because there's that one picture of Emil Sitka, Curly Joe, and Mo rehearsing, and I'm just thinking to myself, I don't know. I mean, at that point, and unfortunately Mo, and then he eventually had a stroke after that because Larry was in the old folks home, the retired actors home, and then Mo passed away just I think the same year as 1975. And but I couldn't imagine keeping that trio together where you don't have any other Howard in it, and then certainly not Larry, which is just amazing.
Yeah, like you've got your Larry Fine or Louis Feinberg, as he was known originally. Yeah, I don't know how well it would have worked, but myself personally, the original three, original four, let me say, and the early stuff, which of course I can't see any of the stage stuff that he did with Ted Healy, but I did see his solo stuff in the 30s and 40s. I mean, and he fit the bill. I don't see what people are saying. It's and then again, when 1958 came along and we were seeing all of the Curly Larry Moes, you wouldn't expect people, especially young kids of that age, to say, "Oh, God, come on, bring on Shemp." Unfortunately, because they probably wouldn't have had. There was no TCM playing all these great movies that you watch one night and you say, "Oh my God, what's Shemp doing in this film?" We have the
Well,
advantage.
one thing I was thinking about, I've heard Billy West talk about this as well, where he said he stopped going to church once he discovered the Stooges,
Yeah,
and when you're watching them, because when you're a kid, you're watching it because it's the wacky violence and stuff. It's again, like you said, cartoonish, but you start to realize that there's a lot of timing, and there's actually well-written lines in there that you almost miss because you're waiting for, you see Curly getting his head in the letterpress, and something's falling on Shemp's head, and or he's getting slapped by a woman, and there's a lot of that timing that goes into it, and you're really kind of learning. That's why I started doing stand-up comedy, is that they say, well, what comedians were you influenced by when you got into comedy? I'm like, I was influenced by the Looney Tunes and Three Stooges. I wasn't really influenced by a stand-up comic, because you can't get into a comedy club until you're 18 or 21 nowadays. So I was influenced by those classical acts. And it's weird to think, because Stooges were known as lowbrow for a while, but when you start to really break it down, it actually is very highbrow. You have Larry with the Stradivarius, you had Curly's playing the upright bass, and it was so funny. And then watching what Shemp was able to do with his dance moves, and again, he also had great timing as well. And when you're a kid, you watch the Curly shorts and how silly it is, and then you start to appreciate, as you get older, you go, I appreciate Shemp more, and I certainly appreciate Larry more. And some people will actually tell you Larry's the funniest of the group when you're watching these. You're like, just watch Larry almost for an entire thing, and just his facial expressions, his some of his lines that I mean, it's so funny. It's really funny for a guy who, you talk about the forgotten Stooge, but it seemed like there were a couple of forgotten Stooges. Like Larry was like in the troupe, was like, all right, well, Larry's just there. He's kind of the bond between the two. And you're like, no, he's an integral part. And just as Shemp was when he was a part of the trio as well.
And you were mentioning the musical talent. Shemp taught himself how to play piano. So at one of these great parties, when uh, Vernon Dent would show up, and by the way, excellent singer, great singer. He's in a short film with Bing Crosby, and he sings in it. If you ever get a chance, of course, I don't know the name. So Shemp would sit down at the piano, rattle off a little tune, and Vernon Dent would start singing. What a great night! They get little drinks and cigars going, and there's Vernon Dent singing and Shemp playing. And by the way, there is another thing too. Women don't hate the Stooges. In fact, especially today's women. And my argument is, go to one Shemp short, Bridal's Groom, where
Yes.
basically, essentially, Christine McIntyre, by the way, who appeared in an awful lot of Shemp solo films too, they basically, well, she slaps him silly. At one point, she basically said, he said her, no, you're being too much of a gentle woman, don't do this. Just lay me out. And she socked him one, and he went right through the door. And that was legit. I mean, I know the door was obviously hinged in such a way that it couldn't go like that. However, he went through the door, lying down on the ground, a little groggy, and he said, apparently put his chin in his hand and said, now that's what I meant, babe. So, and the rest of the film, who's getting hurt? It's the Stooges. Shemp's head is in a vice grip at one point.
He's in a bird cage.
There's women are out there attacking the Stooges. The bottom line is, with the Stooge movies, I think all of them, it's never the Stooges who win. Well, they're Stooges for a start. No matter how well-meaning they are, and what an ill-conceived notion they have of women, the women always come up on top. They win. It's the women. And I know plenty of women who find the Three Stooges quite hilarious. Maybe slightly guilty a few years ago, but now they're saying, no, I love the Stooges. They're great. Love them.
Hold hands, you lovebirds.
Oh, just great. And by the way, I interviewed, as you mentioned, Billy West. He's in my book, for his Shempisms, and they're great. I got a lot of stars in the book, because one thing I wanted to prove, this is almost the goal of my book, is I say that he was not just popular in the day. Bud Abbott said he was one of the greats around. It's just too bad for those crappy Columbia shorts he made that really ruined him. He could have been one of the greatest. It's not just them that thought he was great. It's today. But I thought, how am I going to prove this? So my research, finding people, it took me forever. I mean, I could not find people. But finally, I got some greats. I got Gilbert Gottfried before he died, obviously. Very sad. Wonderful interview. Billy West, great. All kinds of people. I did not get SpongeBob.
Tom Kenny.
I didn't get him, couldn't get him, unfortunately. I know he's a busy fellow. So, however, I do have a quote from Eddie Deason, who said, well, basically, I was told that in a film that I appeared in with SpongeBob, he said, oh, yeah, Shemp was my favorite. That's why I wanted desperately to get him. But he's a busy fellow, and I understand. I just hope he likes the book. He is mentioned.
Well, that book, by the way, is right here. If you're watching on the YouTube, there it's Much More Than a Stooge, Shemp Howard by Geoff Dale, who is my guest right now. And please go purchase this. I mean, like you say, you put years of work into this and countless interviews and everything, trying to get people from the family. You mentioned about Billy West. He was the one that they consulted for that 2012 movie, the Farrelly Brothers, Three Stooges.
Yes.
They actually consulted him, and was it Will Sasso was the one who played Curly?
Two of those are Canadians, by the way. And
Oh, yes.
One, of course, is from Will and Grace. He did a nice job as Larry. I was
Yeah,
surprised.
Sean Hayes. Yeah, he honestly, their acting wasn't bad. It wasn't a terrible film. I
Well,
probably would appreciate it more if I go back.
there is one thing. I guess this one thing saved it for me. I never thought I would ever see Larry David as a Mother Superior. And that was enough to make me say, okay, I got one genuine laugh out of that. I'm not a huge fan. I thought it was okay. It did make money, which is, thumbs up to the Farrellys. By the way, I could not get the Farrellys either. But I'll say no more on that. So, because they are lifelong Stooge fans too. But anyway, if they hear this, they'll be cursing me, probably wanting to sue me now. Anyway, it's, I don't know where I'm going now. I started off somewhere and I'm just rambling totally.
Well, no, I
So,
mean it's but like with the book and everything, you interviewed all these people here, and I mean it's terrific that you were able to get this together and making people remember that it wasn't just Larry, Curly, and Moe. There was this gentleman named Shemp Howard who was a part of
yes.
the act at the beginning, left to do his solo stuff, came back, but still his whole body of work should be appreciated, not just in the Stooges, and that's what you lay out in this book here, and that's
And, and his
it's terrific.
And as he was formerly known, of course, Samuel Horowitz, or if you want to go back to the real Jewish name, it'd be Shmuel Horowitz,
That's
which
right.
is Jewish for, and I should know that because my name Dale is part of the translation of another word, Blumenthal, which means either Flower Valley or more colloquially, Flower Dale. So my grandfather, Isaac Emmanuel Blumenthal, became William Dale back in England. And if you want something, no, this is a horrendously, not a cheap plug, but I like to tell people jokingly that I actually almost died for this film. February the 1st, 2021, I was rushed back to hospital after an operation, not for COVID. And basically, I was dying on the gurney of sepsis. And I was on the way out. And I didn't see Shemp's face. I saw the bright light, didn't hear any music. I was hoping to see Shemp appear, but they saved me. They literally saved my life, brought me back, and then I thought, I'm getting this damn book done. And I want to be the first one. I'm never going to get rich, and I really don't want to get rich or famous because it's not worth it. But I really want people to know I am the first one that did it, and whoever the second one is, I give them thumbs up. I wish you the best, and I hope it's a great book. And
So you could have seen the light, but all of a sudden you hear beep 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 beep.
no, I wish I would have. Yeah, like no angels singing their ceramic tunes. I did see, but it's true. You do see literally a bright light, and I was like thinking, oh my God. It was a freezing cold day, typical of Canada. My feet were frozen. Because I had rushed into the hospital. And I was not being greeted with, oh my God, his blood pressure is 40/50. That's not good. And I thought, oh, okay. So, I felt really good when I was on my way out. And then when I got back in, I felt quite awful. And for 2 weeks, I waited. And then I got out 2 weeks later. And the first thing I did, guess what? I picked up one of my Stooge films and said, I got to put it on. I'm back.
Goodness, you're now the second guest I've had on this podcast right around that time who almost died of sepsis. The other one was Dave Thomas.
Oh, Dave Thomas, another Canadian.
Yep. SCTV, you know, Bob and
Yeah,
Doug. And yeah, he was saying that he basically almost died in 2020. And it wasn't COVID related, it was the sepsis. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, I'm glad you lived long enough to appear on my podcast then, both of
yeah.
you. So you Canadians, you got something that, I don't know if it's that Molson or whatever you have.
Well, you see, I think it's partially it's a British thing, and it's also Canadian. So, and I don't like to separate English Canadians from French Canadians because that causes too much trouble. But you know, I do drink tea, and you could say I had during that 3 or 4 year stretch, was it? I had 4 operations, none of them COVID related. I got all kinds of other sort of diagnoses, but the sepsis one was the one that killed me. And I should have been listening to your show ages ago. So all these people on there, I wanted to get for my book. Dave Thomas was one, and because I think he's extremely talented fellow. Really enjoy his stuff. The McKenzie brothers, isn't it? Is that what they
Yep.
do?
Oh yeah.
Him
That
and
whole show, I don't know what it was but in
oh
Canada, that Kids in the
yeah,
Hall, SCTV, you guys, Rush, of course, you guys really were were put a nice spotlight on Canada back in the 80s, and
it's good. And
Steve,
a lot of them ended up coming down to the States and parking themselves in the Canadianized Los Angeles areas because there's so many Canadians down there, you know. And I don't know. You know, I had a British passport. I've got a Canadian passport. Maybe I should cross the border and get an American passport. I'm just going to wait and see who wins the next election first.
that's right. Well, was it? It was Martin Short. Was he was doing the Jiminy Glick character, and he had Eugene Levy on there, and he's like, "What do you Canadians do when you go on vacation? Do you just go over to the border and look over and wave?" It was just really funny. He's, well,
And
now you're really insulting us here in Canada. And then Dave Thomas comes out as Bob Hope. He's like,
all
ah, well, for my 100th birthday, they're gonna have a 12 kiloton bomb they're blowing off in my honor.
it's funny. But I do say to people, and in all honesty and no joking around, that I just really wanted people to understand that I wasn't doing this just because I wanted to do it and be the first, although that's nice. I just wanted people finally, after all this time, why was a book not written? I mean, you know, it's not as if he's some schmuck who did nothing. It's just I don't think people understand enough about him, need to know a little more and have a little fun. And I think you're not going to laugh at this book. I don't think you will. You might laugh at some of the photos, courtesy of Steve Cox. A lot of them wonderful, wonderful photos. But I think you're going to feel good, and I think people need to feel just a little bit better these days. You know, I felt good in the '60s, but that's a whole other different ball game.
Well, go check that out, folks. Geoff Dale's book on Shemp. I mean, here it is on the, again, if you're watching on the video, over at barnesandnoble.com. Go purchase this, whether it's hardcover, paperback, just put some money in his pocket. And but also because he put a lot of work into this. And honestly, Geoff, I really appreciate you being on the show, talking about Shemp, talking Stooges. I could probably have you on 4 more hours. We could talk about Stooges, but your time is precious, of course, and then we'll just get in the weeds and they're like, oh boy, they're bringing up some really obscure Stooge
Yeah,
factoids and everything like that. But yeah, no, it's great talking to you about this, and good luck with the book going forward. And I can't wait to put this out and talk to all the Stooge fans that who are also probably suffering from Stooge mania as well.
absolutely. And if there's any filmmaker out there, I don't think I can tempt Martin Scorsese, well, I'd love to, you know, who thinks that a good movie could be made on Shemp and the Stooges, and
Who
just
could play Shemp?
just
Who in Hollywood do you think could play Shemp?
well, actually, the Shemp on what's his name's movie, Mel Gibson's TV movie, which was John Kassir. Is that how you pronounce it? Kassir, Kassir.
I think
He
so.
played
Yeah.
he played Shemp actually in that movie, that television movie, and I got him to say a few things, and I think in terms of looks, he did quite a good, you know, quite a good job with the hat and the hair and all that. But nowadays, I'm not sure. But I think it'd be an interesting movie. You know, maybe the Farrelly brothers would talk to me then.
Yeah,
So
I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. Yeah, I could see it. Yeah, I remember watching him back in that. I got to go back and watch that TV movie, the Michael Chiklis thing. That I remember watching it live when it or first run when it came out, and I haven't seen it since because I don't think it's on YouTube or anything. But I got to go check that out.
It got wildly, wildly different critiques, especially from Stooge experts. So I'm not going to say anything more than that because there was some real, dislikes of that film.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought there were moments, but not enough, really. I love Michael Chiklis. What a great actor. I just really, some of his stuff is amazing. However, playing Curly, wow, that's hard.
It's a tall task. It's a tall task, and it's a big task if you want to be Curly. But Geoff, thank you so much for doing this podcast again, and good luck with the book. And yeah, let's keep in touch. I want to hear how the book's going, the book tour, and let's get this out there for a lot of people who are big Stooge fans. Just appreciate Shemp a little bit more. Just watch his stuff just a little bit under more of a microscope and really appreciate what he brought to this. That sure, he's not Curly, but some could even say that he's even better than Curly, depending on what your tastes are. But I appreciate you folks for listening to today's Check Your Brain podcast. This is the free episode. If you want another free episode, it's coming out next Wednesday. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for watching and listening or listening to the podcast. And I'll be back again with you next week with another free episode. Go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur if you want more from me. Why would you? But okay, sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for watching and listening. And I'll be back with you soon. Bye.